County. When that country music hits, you know it's time for another hour of Sports Talk Radio here on 95.3 WCHE. This is Locker Room Buzz. I'm CJ Tully, and we have lots to talk about here today as I was not in the studio last week. So catch you guys up on some of the biggest things from last week, and then obviously everything going on right now with the Eagles, their offensive coordinator opening. We have lots going on in the NFL with the playoffs. We also have a college football national champion now. The Indiana Hoosiers have done the unthinkable, gone 16-0 and won the college football national championship. But we're going to start here with some baseball talk. We know that's right around the corner. Spring training is not going to be that far away, so we'll start there with that. As a lot of news is breaking with a lot of these free agents. And the Phillies, they have not really done all too much. So we'll start here with this. Obviously, the biggest storyline coming from MLB this offseason is the Dodgers. And yes, they have gone back-to-back World Series. And it looks like they're on track to go to their third straight World Series and maybe just win that one as well, as they bring in Kyle Tucker, one of the most touted free agents coming into this offseason. They bring him in on a 4-year deal for $240 million. Now, something the Dodgers like to do is defer a lot of their money to the end of these players' contracts. We're seeing this with Shohei Ohtani, where he has nearly $1 billion deal, and all of that money is going to be going back to the end of his career there. So they're able to bring in a lot of these big-name players. Obviously, they have a huge market as well, and that allows them to be able to do things like this. So Kyle Tucker comes in. He was hitting 22 home runs last year. He has a .266 batting average. He had 73 RBIs with 25 stolen bases. So he's a very lethal player. Obviously, he's not the guy that's going to just come in here and change a poverty program or poverty team, but he can come in here and he can make a difference on a team where you can slot him in, and he's going to be a big help to this lineup that doesn't even need the help. You look at this Dodgers lineup, and the way that they're going to go out this year is it's going to be scary for any team going into them. Now, obviously, injuries can play a factor. They could lose some of these guys, and it hurt them in that aspect, but the bigger story around this is the Dodgers getting all of the major players. People are talking about a lockout. I don't believe that a lockout would happen, and even if it does, we had one of these a couple of years ago where Kyle Schwarber and Nick Castellanos were signed late due to this lockout and the no tension period or no discussion period. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't think the MLB is in a place right now where they're going to be ready to miss games. Now, this would all happen next year, of course, but with the way that the sport is kind of rising and growing and fan bases are starting to get back into it, baseball would kind of be stupid to ever allow this to get to a point where baseball is not on TV, because then that just allows people to fall off even more, people to lose interest, to think that the sport isn't what it is. But how can the MLB fix this issue? How can they fix the fact that some of these teams are bringing in the biggest names every single year, mostly the Dodgers, but there's some other big markets out there that can tap this, such as the Mets, the Yankees. The Phillies are technically a big market team as well. But then you look at teams like the Pirates and the Angels and the A's, and they're not the teams bringing in these huge free agents. They're not the team that's going to be making a jump in 1 year just because of free agency. They're the team that's really just a minor league team to some of these other teams, where you see the A's, they might start to get a player to look really good. You look at the White Sox here with somebody like Luis Robert Jr. He's somebody who hasn't really been great, but he's somebody that they've been able to work with, get it to a point where he could be a trade target. And now he has been a trade target for the past few trade deadlines, but he finally gets traded last night to the Mets. But that's just an example of some of these lower-end teams that can accumulate some stock in a player and then ship him off and get some draft picks or some young talent in reverse. So they are kind of becoming the minor league team. They're not out there bringing in the big names. And we'll see how that affects baseball going forward. My pitch for all of this is you can't just necessarily put a cap on things, because then these teams that still don't want to spend, they're not still going to be spending the money. You need almost to put a floor and a cap limit. You need to have a nice spending area where teams have to spend a certain amount, but teams can't spend over a certain amount. And yes, it sucks because baseball's had this no ceiling their entirety of the MLB, but it's gotten to a point now where some of these contracts are getting so outlandish that you're not going to have these small market teams competing for a championship or competing for even their divisions at that point, because of how much these bigger teams are bringing in and how much stock these teams have started to hold since they've been able to bring in some of these bigger players. So that's something to keep an eye on there, is what baseball will do to fix this. There's been obviously a lot of different things pitched out there, but we're yet to see anything set in stone. We'll see what happens next year when all of this comes to be. But there are some other moves being made in baseball, a lot of these impacting the Phillies. So last week, it was, I want to say Wednesday night, the Phillies were in talks with Bo Bichette to where they could have gotten him on a $200 million deal. It was set in stone, pretty much a handshake deal that, yes, Bo Bichette is going to be coming to the Phillies. Next thing you know, the next morning you wake up, and here's Bo Bichette signing with the New York Mets. Now, he signs on a 3-year, $126 million deal. I believe the Phillies deal was going to be $200 million, I want to say 4 years. So the Phillies were still, or 5 years maybe, the Phillies were going to be putting out a decent amount there for Bo Bichette. He takes the pay cut and goes on a shorter year contract. And this seems to be something a lot of players are doing as well. You look at somebody like Kyle Tucker, who signs with the Dodgers on just a 4-year deal. He was offered 10-year deals with the Blue Jays. So there is something to be said about the fact that players are taking a shorter yearly salary and that they're going to be taking a shorter contract to maybe get another contract somewhere else, or they'll see how the market changes, because that's also something that I think has come back to bite some of these players. You look at somebody like a Bryce Harper, who when he signed his deal with the Phillies was one of the highest paid players in baseball, and now you look at that contract and that's nothing compared to what some of these other players are making. So there's a lot of players taking this pay cut initially knowing that the market's going to change, and maybe on the other side of things they can get a higher payday or something more established in that realm of things. So Bo Bichette goes to the Mets, and the Mets have had an interesting offseason. They've added a lot of players that they don't necessarily need or have a place for. You look at Bo Bichette, they add Marcus Semien, you had Jorge Polanco, who's going to be playing first base for them now. You do get rid of Brandon Nimmo, you get rid of Pete Alonso as well, so they've lost some pieces in all of this, but the pieces that they're adding in, they're kind of just getting big names and finding places for them on the field. It's almost like they're doing a My Career or My Team on a video game where they're just getting the greatest players, but they don't necessarily have a spot to lock them in. So we'll see how all of this works for the Mets. As I said before, they also added Luis Robert Jr., as he'll be playing in their outfield there. They brought in Cedric Mullins last offseason. We'll see if he's remaining with the team. But the Mets are a team that's at least showing that they want to do something. They brought in Juan Soto last year. Yes, they didn't make the playoffs, but the Phillies made the playoffs and got bounced the first round. So, yes, the Phillies made the playoffs, but they might as well not have, with the fact that now they felt comfortable to just bring back they bring back Kyle Schwarber, and now they re-signed JT Realmuto to a 3-year, $45 million contract, and this was supposed to be the answer to Bo Bichette being signed by the Mets. Now, I never wanted Bo Bichette. I didn't believe that he was going to be the fix for the Phillies. You would have had to ship out either Stott or Bohm in this scenario, and trust me, I'm more than happy to get rid of one of them. But you look at the fact that Bo Bichette would have come in here. He had 18 home runs last year, 94 RBIs. He hit 311, so certainly no knock at Bo Bichette, but he's not somebody that would have come in here and necessarily changed the culture, changed what this Phillies team was doing. Yes, he had the tie to Don Mattingly, and I thought that would be a huge pitch as to why he could come here. Maybe there was some kind of connection there that could have helped this Phillies team, but on the broader scheme of what this team has done, yes, you bring back JT Realmuto. Yes, you bring back Kyle Schwarber, but your only addition so far has been Adolis Garcia and a few bench pieces, or bullpen pieces. That's not enough to get you over a hump. You lost to the Dodgers. Now the Dodgers go out and get Kyle Tucker, and your answer to that was, well, we could play them again, and maybe they'll just not win as many games. That's not necessarily somewhere that's going to get you anywhere. And you look at somebody like the Mets, they're adding to their team. I don't think they're some great powerhouse, and the Mets always met, but they're at least giving their fan base something to look at. You look at the Braves; they were just injured the past few years when they're not able to make a big run. So they're somebody that's still possibly able to contend. You look at the Nationals team, this Marlins team; they've kind of been hanging around now. The Marlins team, I think, is a lot further off, but this isn't necessarily going to be a lock for the Phillies going forward. They're not a bad team whatsoever. They're not the 2014 Phillies or 2015 Phillies, but they're not doing anything to say, hey, this season is going to be that much different. You're continuing to run it back. And I had a problem with Rob Thompson coming out, I believe it was yesterday, saying, oh, this isn't the same team. We have a 20 to 25% turnover of what we had last year. A lot of that was losing players. You lost Strahm. You lost Ranger Suarez, who just signed a 5-year contract, $130 million with the Red Sox, which congratulations to him on that. He was 12-8 last year when 26 games played with a 3.2 ERA. Again, somebody that I didn't necessarily want to bring back before the offseason, but looking at what we've done, I think he's somebody that could have at least helped reassure some fans about this rotation, because we still don't know what's going to happen with Aaron Nola. We still don't know what's going to happen with Zach Wheeler. Aaron Nola's, is he ever going to get back to a top 10 Cy Young candidate? We'll remain to see what happens with that. You're going to bring in Andrew Painter, which they're going to try and sell you on that he's this great pitcher, and they haven't traded him at all. There was lots of prospect capital they could have gotten. There was lots of players like Stephen Kwan last year they could have brought in for an Andrew Painter, and they've continued to hold on to him, but he did not play well with the Iron Pigs last year. He was allowing about 4 runs a game, getting about 5 or 6 innings of work. So he's not somebody that I'm necessarily excited to see pitch this year. You're also going to see Brandon Crawford come up. He's a solid player. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking him. But to say that these players are going to be the answers to the Phillies' woes, and to say that this is the turnover, this isn't running it back because you got these few players you're going to plug and play. You bring in Adolis Garcia, who the Phillies have this thing each year where they bring in somebody who's a little washed. You look at Max Kepler. You look at Austin Hayes, you look at what they did with Whit Merrifield. Now they're bringing in Adolis Garcia, and these guys are not selling points to say, hey, these guys are going to come and change the team. You look at somebody like a Nick Castellanos who they brought in here, and I was a huge fan of the move at the time. He was coming off a nearly MVP season, but now you're just going to have to pay him $20 million to walk out the door because he's not a fit for this team anymore. I don't want to keep stocking up on this outfield wash talent that you're just stuck with, and that's seemingly where this Phillies team's going to be. I personally want Harrison Bader back. I know a lot of people would agree with me on that, but can you even look at a Harrison Bader as somebody that this team's going to be stuck with going forward if he wants a long-term deal? Where's the real answer? Who is our solid outfield help? It can't continue to be a platoon. If you want Harrison Bader on this team, he's going to have to be a starter. I don't know what that does for Brandon Marsh in that whole aspect of things, but there's still a lot more questions than answers for this Phillies team this offseason. I haven't seen anything that gives me any hope to say, hey, this year is going to be different than next year. You have an older team now going into this season. You're going to have JT Realmuto now on a 3-year deal. Kyle Schwarber's coming in on a 5-year deal. What are these players going to be towards the end of that stint? You also have Bryce Harper, who's continuing to ask for his payday. Now, I'll give him credit. I haven't heard it as much lately, but you do know that Bryce Harper's going to want an extension somehow, and I don't know how you can do that. You have Trey Turner, who's aging. You're not seeing any production from Bohm or Stott. It kind of seems like they're set in their ways. What is giving this Phillies team any kind of oomph to say, hey, this season's going to be different than last and the last and the last? It's the same story over and over and over, and I'm waiting for something. I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, the ball to drop, something to change with this Phillies team to say, I have a reason to buy in this next season. And with spring training coming around, you'll see what that young talent can do, but I don't believe young talent is what this Phillies team needed. I do think you needed to turn the page and bring up these guys, but I'll continue to say this is something we should have done last season when you had the dog days of summer, late July and August. Bring up a Justin Crawford, bring up a Painter, see what they can do in an MLB environment, and then now this season we can say, hey, they looked really good last year. This is something I'm really looking forward to seeing, rather than saying this is kind of an experiment we're going to throw out here. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, maybe we'll bring in some bum at the trade deadline who can play here for a few months, and then we'll let him go as well. But in the meantime, we'll trade a few prospects to do that. So this Phillies team has just not been running well. You look at Dave Dombrowski's track record, and even when he left the Tigers, that team was bad for a long time. Yes, he got them to a peak, but after that, he kind of walked out the door, and that Tigers team had to rebuild, and I'm kind of getting scared that that's where this Phillies team is headed as well, where we're getting to the point that, hey, Dave Dombrowski's getting all these pieces. It's never going to fully click. You bring back the exact same coach. You bring back the exact same lineup, and we're just hoping that something sticks with this team, and I don't know what it's going to be. Again, I think they're looking to maybe buy at the trade deadline again, but they've never made that move at the deadline that's made the difference. That's where I'm scared with this Phillies team, is how far are they willing to go to bring a national champion, or to bring a championship to Philadelphia. And yes, they've brought in the pieces. Don't get me wrong, this is not the old Phillies team, but when they're not working, you have to be able to adjust or things aren't going to work. The Dodgers have won back-to-back World Series, and they haven't even settled in their ways. They've brought in new players every single year to add to what this team is doing. They bring in Michael Conforto on a pretty expensive deal just to sit on the bench just because they want that depth. So you got to be willing to spend the stupid money that you said you would want to. You have early on in this whole thing, but you haven't adjusted since then. It's kind of like they had this plan that these players were going to be the players to do it, and they had no intent on bringing anybody else into this. I'm curious what the players in the locker room think. Do they kind of just hit a dead end of like, yeah, here we go again. Let's hope something works. But yeah, that's my rant with the Phillies there. I'm hoping that something changes. I'm hoping this team comes out firing, guns a-blazing here to start the season. Of course, still excited for baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan. It's my favorite sport to watch and be a part of. So I'm hoping this Phillies team can do something different, but you can't really get your hopes up until we're in the second round of the playoffs right now, because if it's anything like last year and it's just pure heartbreak, I mean, you got to blow this entire thing up and just restart, because I don't know how much further this can go, but we'll see what the Phillies can do. Obviously, they brought in JT Realmuto on another deal. They brought in Adolis Garcia. They brought in some pitching, and they bring back Kyle Schwarber. Maybe that's enough in their eyes, but we will see. Stay tuned here, though, on 95.3 WCHE. It's Locker Room Buzz. We have lots more to talk about, including the College Football National Championship and the state of the NFL. So don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Locker Room Buzz. I'm your host, CJ Tully, and like I said, lots to talk about here in college football. Yes, the national championship has been decided, and yes, I've been, I believe, one of the only shows to really talk about college football here, so I want to keep you guys posted on the latest now that it is all over. And for one last time here, let's talk college football.
Just come outside for the night. Take your time, get your life.
All right, so we had ourselves the College Football National Championship, which included teams of Miami and Indiana. Now, I was not on air last week to tell you guys my predictions and all, but if you follow anything of Let's Talk Sports, I did it all on social media, and I had a few podcasts out as well, so always check that out as well. Other than my live show here on Wednesdays, I'm also on social media every day posting content, and I do weekly podcasts. Let's Talk Sports. That's Let's TAWK Sports, and you can check that out at letstalksports.com as well. But this national championship was destined to be a great game. You looked at these teams coming into the season, and there were no high expectations. Yes, you saw Indiana make the playoffs last year. They got bounced by Notre Dame. Go Irish. But Miami and Indiana coming into this were not necessarily the top dogs. Yes, Indiana, they were undefeated coming into the playoffs. They won the Big Ten championship over Ohio State, but nobody was really saying that this team had enough. There was always that thing that could kind of hold them back. They had to play Alabama. They demolished Alabama 38-3. And there was really no hope for Alabama in that game. They had to play with a backup quarterback in Austin Mack as Ty Simpson went down, but Indiana came out that game guns a-blazing. And you look at some of these teams in every sport coming out of a bye week, and yes, they're very slow to start. They don't necessarily have the juice. Indiana was the complete opposite. They came out firing in that game. Then they took on Oregon, and they had a pick six to start that game. And Oregon was kind of a sloppy team coming into that one, so yes, it was kind of expected that Indiana could win that, but the way that they did so was it was phenomenal. It's their second time they beat Oregon this season, so that then put them in the national championship. Then you look at a team like Miami. They were still fighting for a playoff spot late. They didn't even have to play the final championship weekend to get that spot, as no ACC team got represented, so it kind of gave them a leg up on Notre Dame. They also beat Notre Dame to start the season, so they got in. They got slotted in at the 10 seed, and this team was just fighting their way from there on out. They had to play an early first-round game where they had to play Ohio State. They won that one pretty handily, actually. The defense showed up big time in that one. They had to play Ole Miss. Ole Miss game was a very tight one for them as well, but they came out of it. And you saw this team's progression. They actually started their playoffs playing Texas A&M in a game that Texas A&M should have dominated. Yes, the win in that game played a factor, but this Miami team continued to grow throughout the playoffs, and that's what got me on their bandwagon, was how they won football games. They're a very defensive team, and they knew how to run the football. So yes, there were lots of question marks coming into it for both teams, but the way that Miami went from 7 sacks in that first game to 5 sacks against Ohio State to then only a sack against Ole Miss, they were kind of on that downward trajectory headed towards the national championship. But the one thing that made me take Miami in this national championship was that Carson Beck was able to step up in that Ole Miss game when he wasn't necessarily able to do so in the other games. It was the defense making the difference, but we saw him step up with 2 touchdowns and 268 yards against Ole Miss. That gave me the courage, or not the courage, but the hindsight to say, hey, Miami could beat Indiana if they play this brand of football, this perfect football. We saw Carson Beck also rush for a game-winning touchdown against Ole Miss. So there was a lot going their way. There was a lot to say that they had a chance. So I did take Miami in that game, but that was just not the way it went. My first thing I said coming into this game in the preview that I did there on Let's Talk Sports was they have to play perfect football against Indiana. They cannot make mistakes or they're going to have no chance in this game. And on the other side of that, they're going to have to force mistakes by Indiana. So none of that really happened, and Miami still had a chance. You looked at Miami. They had a punt blocked for a touchdown. They were getting 3 and outs. They weren't able to establish a game early. So Indiana wins this one 27-21 to win the program's first national championship, and they did so in pretty dominant fashion. So what were the biggest standouts here? Well, Fernando Mendoza wins the Heisman, and he goes 16 for 27 in this game, 186 yards, and the biggest rushing touchdown you will have seen all season long on a 4th down call that it was pretty much for the game. Gets the first down, continues to pile his way forward, and he finds the end zone for a big touchdown in that game. So Miami, like I said, still did have a chance late. Carson Beck going down the field, throws an interception, does the most Carson Beck thing possible to end a game, but kudos to Miami to even staying in this game. I mean, that defense did play well. They were able to get to Mendoza. They forced him to have incompletions, which he only had 5 incompletions in the college football playoffs leading up to this game, opposed to 8 touchdowns that he had thrown. So this was a big game for the Miami defense. The offense just took too long to get involved. And I was sitting there watching the game saying, why isn't Carson Beck getting involved? Why isn't he throwing the ball more? They were really reliant on this run game, which makes sense when Mark Fletcher Jr. had been playing so well. But after seeing what Carson Beck was able to do against Ole Miss, I thought they would come out firing, try and get Indiana on their toes. and they just didn't do that. And then by the time that they were able to get the run game going, the safeties, the linebackers were already creeping up because they saw that Miami was just running the ball. So Mark Felder Jr. does go for 112 yards with 2 touchdowns, a lot of those coming on big rushes. But again, Miami didn't play bad in this game. They had the opportunity. They threw the pick late to end this game. Malachi Toney, he had 122 yards with a touchdown. He is somebody that's going to be fun to watch for years to come. Comes in as a true freshman, and I mean, this guy catches everything that comes his way. It's really fun to watch him play. He goes a lot on screen passes. He can rush the ball out of the backfield. So keep an eye on Malachi Toney going forward. On the Indiana side of things, I already told you what Mendoza was able to do, but this running attack for Indiana was very underrated all season long. Kalen Black, 17 carries for 79 yards, and Roman Hemby, 19 carries for 60 yards. So something that people didn't realize coming into this national championship was they actually rushed the ball more than they threw the ball, and they were still winning at the pace and at the scores that they were. So to see this happen again, it's everything was going Indiana's way this season. Like I said, Miami would have had to play perfect football to really win this one. They had the turnover late, which cost them. But all in all, a great season for both teams. Now, Indiana has more to look forward to in the years to come. Curt Cignetti is going to be able to run this program. On the other side of things with Miami, they're probably going to take a bit of a step backward. They're going to be losing a lot of their seniors. So we'll see what happens with all of that. Some of the biggest stats, though, to keep an eye on, that I kept an eye on for this game was on third downs. Miami was 3 for 11, while Indiana was 6 for 16. Again, this Miami defense made the difference to keep them involved in this game because I believe it was the game against Oregon. Indiana was 11 for 14 on third downs. So that, again, Miami's defense did what it needed to do to stay in this game. The offense just couldn't play perfect, and the special teams having that punt blocked really made a difference in this game. I also noticed a lot of missed tackles there by Miami. That was something else I was screaming at the TV was every time they ran the ball, the guy fell forward for an extra 2 or 3 yards. They weren't able to wrap up their running backs. And then on the wide receiver side of things, Charlie Becker. I mean, this is a guy I made a whole entire video just about him on TikTok and Instagram that he's somebody that just showed up out of nowhere to make a difference for this team. You look at what he did in that game against Ohio State, and I mean, this guy made a difference. He went for over 100 yards in their conference championship game, and then every game in the playoffs going for 50, 60, and in this game he goes for a good amount as well. He goes for over 65 yards in this game as well. So Charlie Becker, the back shoulder throws, everything was completed to him. He did not drop a ball on the night. Elijah Surratt did have a few drops, but again, he had 28 yards in this game on some pretty big receptions. And Omar Cooper Jr., the hero from Penn State, he made a 71-yard plays on this game as well. So again, there were good things to take away from both teams. It is Indiana coming out on top, and we'll see what this means for both programs going forward. And a lot of people want to have the discussion as to whether or not this means any program can just turn around with the right coach and with the right pieces being added. And I wouldn't necessarily go that far to say that any program can necessarily do this. If I was to say one program that I think is kind of on the same trajectory as Indiana was, I would say Pitt could be the next team to do this, a team that's never won the championship, that kind of falls into the same standings as what Indiana was before this big breakout. I would say Pitt would be the next team to do something like this, but it's not going to be that easy. It's the Big Ten, which I think people need to put more respect on because they're winning college football championships. They won 3 in a row now with Michigan, Ohio State, and now Indiana. And I mean, heck, Penn State could turn it around and they could be the next team next year. So this Big Ten program, every Big Ten program is really starting to change things up. The Big Ten, the one thing I'll disagree with them on is they won a 2014 playoff. Not a fan of that whatsoever. That's just pretty much putting everybody in there. But they do have a lot of representation in that top 24, so maybe I could see their point there. But, I mean, even Oregon could turn it around in a season, and they could be the ones in the college football national championship. Meanwhile, in the SEC, you kind of see some teams falling apart. They can't win bowl games. You can start to see the Big Ten become the conference of football, and it'd be really interesting to see that because it would just mean the North has even more sports and more draw than the South. So that's something to keep an eye on going forward is the Big Ten going to continue to dominate college football when it comes down to it? Even head-to-head matchups. That was something last year that we thought we would see a lot of, is these SEC schools coming up to the North. They had to play in that first round. We saw it with Tennessee and Ohio State, where Ohio State just ran through Tennessee, even though people thought that Tennessee would have the upper hand just being the SEC school, having that bigger competition. But when you look at what Big Ten football is, in my opinion, it's defense, it's grittiness, and it's hard-nosed football. In the South, it's more of those explosive plays, and it seems like things are coming back to playing football as it was meant to be played, and you play on defense, and you have championship defenses, and I'm really excited to see what this means going forward. There's definitely going to be changes headed into next season, especially with the way the playoffs are set up. And we're going to hopefully see some changes with this transfer portal stuff as well, because the way that is all worked out, and the way that coaches have to leave and players have to leave mid-season, it's not fair to anybody. But I'll get into all of that on the other side of this break. Stay tuned here on 95.3 WCAG. You're listening to the Locker Room Buzz. Back to Locker Room Buzz. I'm CJ Tully, and we have lots to still talk about here in college football. It's not done just yet. We have the transfer portal news that is obviously eminent to everybody. So I'm going to go through a few of the biggest moves, in my opinion, that we've seen so far in the transfer portal, and how well I think they fit with that team and what I think we can look at with them going forward. So we'll start off here with what Texas Tech has been able to do, and they were one of the biggest teams to make moves coming into this season, but they really focus on that defensive line. Now we're seeing them bring in a quarterback in Brandon Sorsby from Cincinnati. Now, he was one of the top transfer portal quarterbacks in this year's transfer portal, so they're able to bring him in. Baron Morton was their quarterback this season. He did great things for them, but he could not show up in the playoffs. So we'll see if Brandon Sorsby maybe brings a little bit more of that edge that can help Texas Tech this season. But this past season, he had 2,800 yards, 27 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He also had 580 yards rushing with 9 rushing touchdowns. So a very dynamic quarterback coming over from Cincinnati. He almost had them in the Big 12 championship. They kind of fell off late in the season, but we'll see what they can do, what he can do now with Texas Tech. Another big quarterback signing was Sam Leavitt going to LSU from Arizona State. He was their quarterback in the playoffs last season when Arizona State started to make a little bit of a run, but obviously that came to an end. They lost their head coach there at Arizona State. So that left Sam Leavitt to go to LSU, where he'll be joining Lane Kiffin. And I think Charlie Weiss is still going to be going to LSU. There's a lot of talks about him maybe going to the NFL and taking an offensive coordinator position. But if not, I think him and Sam Leavitt could be a great pairing there on that offense for LSU. This past season, Sam Leavitt kind of had a bit of a drop-off year with 1,600 yards, 10 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Not much going on around him, though, weapon-wise for him to find, except for Jordan Tyson. On the quarterback market, we still have Drew Mestemaker. He goes from North Texas to Oklahoma State. He follows a lot of players that are going over there from his team at North Texas. The head coach gets hired at Oklahoma State. He brings over, actually, I'll get to those players a little bit. But Drew Mestemaker this past season, 4,300 yards, 34 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He also rushed for 5 touchdowns. Drew Mestemaker is a pocket passer. He's your old school kind of quarterback. And I'm curious to see what he can do now going over to Oklahoma State. He was playing in the American Conference there with North Texas, so we'll see what he can do in this step up. Another big quarterback going from a lower conference to a bigger conference is Byron Brown. He'll be going from South Florida to Auburn following his head coach over there. And I love Byron Brown. I love everything about him. This past season, 3,100 yards, 28 touchdowns with 7 interceptions. He also rushed for 1,000 yards with 14 touchdowns. He's going to be a great addition to the SEC. He's going to be bringing some life back to Auburn, and we'll see what they can do this season. They're bringing in a few different pieces this offseason. Another quarterback move is Josh Hoover going from TCU over to the national championship team of Indiana. So they're finding their final fix there for that. He had 3,400 yards this year, 29 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. We're going to need to see that to go down a little bit, but Josh Hoover going over to Indiana. Another big quarterback move, Rocco Becht will follow his head coach, Matt Campbell, over to Penn State. He was playing with Iowa State. He got 2,500 yards this past season, 16 touchdowns with 9 interceptions. He also rushed for 8 touchdowns. So we'll see what he can do with Penn State. I'm really excited to see what this offense will be. It is pretty much just the Iowa State offense as they bring over a few different players, which I'll get to in just a bit. But Rocco Becht was somebody a lot of people had eyes on there in the Big Ten with Iowa State, and now we're going to see him on a bigger stage with Penn State. We'll see what he can do there. Ethan Gronkmeyer staying on Penn State. He'll be transferring out of Penn State and go to Georgia Tech, where he will rejoin James Franklin there. He had 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions in his limited time here. He did play in their bowl game where they ended up beating Clemson, so a big win there for Ethan Gronkmeyer, but again, joining his head coach, James Franklin from Penn State. Then you have Dylan Raiola. He's obviously been all over the place. He's the guy that everybody thinks looks like Patrick Mahomes, and he tries to take on that whole persona. He'll be going from Nebraska to Oregon, where, again, he couldn't have seen this one coming, but now he's going to be the backup to Dante Moore as he decides to stay with Oregon. He had 2,000 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions this season. So, again, he'll be in a backup role. Not sure that's necessarily where he wanted to be, but the transfer portal is closed. So he's going to be now playing backup to Dante Moore. Another quarterback on the move is Bo Pribula. This is his second year entering the portal where he'll be on the move. He went from Penn State to Missouri last year. He played well with Missouri this year, 1,900 yards, 11 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, but he rushed for 297 yards with 6 touchdowns. He's now going over to Virginia. So, in my opinion, I'd say it's a little bit of a step down for him, but Virginia was fighting for their conference championship there in the ACC, so we'll see if maybe that can continue there with Bo Pribula at the helm. I love how dynamic he can be. Missouri obviously had a bit of a fall-off to end that season. You also have Cam Coleman now going on to the wide receivers. He'll be going from Auburn to Tennessee. He had 708 yards this year with 5 touchdowns. Cam Coleman, somebody to keep an eye on. I was hoping he might stay with Auburn to see what he could do with Byron Brown, but now we'll see him over there with Tennessee. Some big transfer here from Florida is going to be Eugene Wilson III. He's going over to LSU where he will join Sam Leavitt. He had 239 yards with 3 touchdowns. He did play in just 6 games this season. He was somebody that had a lot of eyes on him headed into the season with Florida, but we saw the way DJ Lagway played and how that team kind of fell off. But we'll see what happens with him now going over to LSU and joining that high-powered offense. Parker Livingston will be going from Texas to Oklahoma. He had 516 yards with 6 touchdowns. He's somebody to definitely keep an eye on. I think he played well with Texas, but didn't necessarily have all the same opportunities. There were other players, obviously, on that Texas offense. But in Oklahoma, I think he will have a solid chance. Sean Mateer is going to be staying there, so maybe that offense can get going with some more star power at the wide receiver position. I said I was going to get back to what's going on with North Texas. We're seeing Caleb Hawkins at running back. He'll also be joining Oklahoma State. And this guy was dominant all season long. 1,400 yards, 25 touchdowns. And on the receiving end of things, 370 yards with 4 touchdowns. So a dynamic running back that Drew Messemaker will continue to be able to work with. Again, Drew Messemaker himself, not a rushing quarterback, so to have somebody he's familiar with in the backfield with him will be huge. Coming out of Texas as well, you're going to have Contrevion Wisner. He's coming from Texas. He'll be going to Florida State, 597 yards with 3 touchdowns. And then finally at the tight end position, we're going to have Benjamin Brahmer. He's joining his quarterback from Iowa State as well, where he'll be going to Penn State, 446 yards with 6 touchdowns. So lots of movement going on here with everything in college football and this portal. So we'll see what happens with that. The final one I want to get to here is DJ Lagway. He is also going to be transferring. We'll see what he can do at Baylor. Big step down, in my opinion, again, for DJ Lagway, but maybe he needs that for his development. You know, he's still young. Didn't have the season he would have expected there with Florida, so now he'll be heading over to see what he can do with this Baylor team. Now, some other things I want to talk about here with not even college football. Now let's move on to what we can see going forward with the NFL. Now, I do want to talk about this Eagles team, as I wasn't able to talk about them last week as we weren't on air, but they lost to the 49ers 23-19. We didn't see the greatest game from this Eagles team. I never see a great game for the Phillies team either, but the Eagles, Jalen Hurts went 20 for 35, 168 yards with a touchdown. Saquon Barkley, 106 yards. Devontae Smith with 70 yards. Dallas Goedert, this guy has been the difference maker all season long for the Eagles. The most unsung hero of the season was Dallas Goedert. He had 33 yards with a touchdown and a rushing touchdown as well. A.J. Brown, 3 receptions, 25 yards. And this is where I want to start the conversation. A.J. Brown needs to be traded out of Philly. Not because of his lack of talent, not because of all the drama necessarily, but because it's just not a fit anymore. Yes, he came in kind of friends with Jalen Hurts. They were all buddy-buddy, but you can tell something is off with this locker room. And I'll get to my Jalen Hurts gripes in just a bit, but they're not going to move on from him. So if something's going to change in this locker room, something's going to change with this team, it's going to have to be with A.J. Brown. And you could probably get yourself a solid haul trading out A.J. Brown. There's a decent wide receiver group that you're going to have here as well going into this draft. Maybe if you, I don't think you can, but if you can get a first-round pick for A.J. Brown, try and flip that into a first-round wide receiver, that would be big. Devontae Smith, he's been very quiet through all of this, and he has enough skill to be a number 1 wide receiver. If you bring in somebody that can be a distraction as a number 2, if you get rid of A.J. Brown and your number 2 is just going to be Jahan Dotson, if you re-sign him, you're going to see a hit taken to Devontae Smith. He's not going to be the same player. But if you can bring in somebody to take some eyes off Smith, make Smith your number 1 target, that can be a solid choice there for Jalen Hurts. So, my opinion, A.J. Brown has to be out. They had the bickering on the sideline. It's every week with this guy. All season long, the storyline was coming in, is A.J. Brown going to touch the ball? Is he going to touch it enough? Is he going to be happy? And let's see what he does in his post-game press conference. So if we're not going to see the greatest things coming out of A.J. Brown, we're not going to see the best locker room established here because of A.J. Brown, I say you cut ties, you restart, and you see what you can do with that. Now, going on to what I think has to happen with Jalen Hurts, he is definitely becoming an issue with this team. And if anybody's been listening for a while now, I've defended Jalen Hurts week in and week out because he wins football games. And to me, that's the most important thing, is winning football games. Now we're seeing this team start to not win football games. We're seeing them without an offensive coordinator, and the two biggest offensive coordinators that the Eagles have not wanted to be part of this team. You saw what the Dolphins coordinator, I'm drawing a blank on his name, Mike, he goes over and he joins his team, and now you see what's going on here with Brian Daboll, where it seems like he's either going to be joining Robert Saleh with Tennessee, or you're going to be seeing him go for the head coaching job of Buffalo. So where do the Eagles pivot? What is holding these top coordinators from coming to a team that just won a Super Bowl last season and who was just a few more wins away from winning it this season? What is stopping that? My only assumption would be that people are not too happy with what Jalen Hurts is doing. They're not happy with his locker room environment, and that the Eagles just kind of look like a pitfall that you don't want to necessarily find yourself in as a coach. So where can they go? Well, they're going to have to find somebody that's a lower quality offensive coordinator. I like the idea of bringing in Charlie Weiss from Ole Miss. That's where I hinted at earlier, but where do they go? I'm not necessarily sure. And I do think Jalen Hurts' play falls into a lot of this. We're seeing here in his past few years, you just look at his passing yards. We're seeing this year he went for 3,200. Last year was 2,900, so it was definitely a step up this year, as Saquon Barkley wasn't able to be relied on as much. But then in 2023, the Super Bowl year, 3,800 yards. That's 600 more than we saw from him this year. We're seeing the completion percentage drop as well with those less yards being thrown. We also saw the touchdowns. Yes, he's got a career high in touchdown passes this year. But then we're seeing the rushing attempts go down, and we're seeing everything that he's doing rushing yards-wise. This year he had 105 carries and as the rushing quarterback. Last year, 150. Year before that, 157, 165 in 2022. That obviously has dropped off, but he has about a 200-yard drop-off as well in all of this. And just from last year to this year, 14 touchdowns last year, 8 touchdowns rushing this year. Tush-push was completely outlawed by the Eagles themselves pretty much this year. We didn't see that utilized. But if we're not going to see the production out of him with the arm, we're seeing the giant drop-off here with what he's doing with his legs. What gives a coordinator any hope to come in here and say, hey, I could be the one to change Jalen Hurts? Is Jalen Hurts just so stuck in the way that he plays? Does he truly not care as much? This whole stoic viewpoint we have of Jalen Hurts, is that just who he is? Are we not going to see him take this more seriously or show any care, any drive, any love for the game anymore? Jalen Hurts might have to be the next thing to go. I don't know when they'll pull the trigger on that. I would assume if this season is really bad, that's when you could see that happen. But then when do you draft that quarterback? Do you take, this is a horrible draft class for quarterbacks right now. You saw Dante Moore fell off, so maybe you could bring in a Trinidad Chambliss late. I don't know, because I know a lot of quarterback teams are going to be looking for a quarterback. Next year's draft should be really deep in quarterbacks, though. So in my opinion, you give Jalen Hurts this year to prove something. If he doesn't prove anything, you draft your quarterback next year, and you just rework this team. This defense is going to be great for years to come. Quinyon Mitchell in this game had 2 interceptions. You still have Cooper DeJean. You have Reed Blankenship. You have young guys on this defense that can be good for years to come. Even on your line, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, this defense will be fine. You keep Vic Fangio there. You let this defense do its thing. The offense is where you have this older talent that's going to have to be flipped. And we're starting to see the decline of Saquon Barkley. I know nobody's going to want to hear that, but after what he did last year to what he did this year, you can't rely on him necessarily. You're going to have to let Jalen Hurts do his thing. You're going to need to see this offensive line grow as well. So if the defense is fine, I use these draft picks this year. You bring in a wide receiver, you get rid of A.J. Brown, and you work on this offensive line. Maybe you bring in a cornerback as well late to get rid of Adoree Jackson, but we'll see what happens with that. My bigger issues, though, come with the fact that nobody wants to work with Jalen Hurts. I don't know who you get a coordinator, and next year you might be looking to bring in your next quarterback, but that's everything on the Eagles. I will break down everything we saw in the NFL games this weekend, but stay tuned here on 95.3 WCHE. And welcome back to Locker Room Buzz. I'm your host, CJ Tully. That song continues to hit every single time, but we still have lots to talk about here within the NFL. We have some job hirings going on. We have lots to talk about with these games, as well as we're starting to see some of the biggest teams just not be able to live up to par this season. We'll start here with what we saw with the Bills and the Broncos. The Bills fall in this one 33-30 as the Broncos win in overtime. Now, biggest storyline coming out of this one is Bo Nix unable to go as he broke his foot, but my boy Jared Stidham is going to be able to come into this one and really make a name for himself. I've been a huge fan of him since his time with the Patriots. He went over to the Raiders, now with the Broncos, and we'll see what he can do. But let's recap this game a bit. Josh Allen, 25 for 39, 283 yards with 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 2 lost fumbles. Josh Allen lost them this game. Now, when you look at a lot of these quarterbacks, a lot of people get excuses made for them, and then there's players like Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, who get thrown under the bus for everything. One of the quarterbacks that continues to get a bye on everything is Josh Allen. And yes, he cried and he was emotional, and we all feel bad for him because he should have gotten over the hump. But why are we not talking about Josh Allen being the reason that this Bills team lost this game? He made careless plays. He did not step up when they needed him the most. And you can look at this something just as simple as the Eagles game against the Bills to finish out the season, where Josh Allen lost them that one as well with making bad decisions, bad calls, and you have to take responsibility once in a while. Now the coach is fired. Sean McDermott is out as the Bills head coach. Where do they go from here? Is Josh Allen really Superman, or is he just what more can he do? I get he has no weapons around him, but they've clearly not cared about that as they've done nothing to bring in anything around him. They've left it to be Josh Allen's team. James Cook, 24 carries for 117 yards in this game. I'd said since the beginning of the season, and I will quote myself on this, that James Cook was carrying Josh Allen and making him look good despite some poor play by Josh Allen. And yet again, we saw that here in their biggest game of the season against the Broncos. So where does this Bills team go? Maybe they take the A.J. Brown. Maybe that's their move that they can make. But there needs to be changes here on this team. I don't think it was necessarily a coaching issue. It's the fact that there's no pieces around Josh Allen, but that Josh Allen doesn't necessarily get the hit for any of this. He's the pretty boy of the NFL. And that's just how it is. But on the other side of things here with the Broncos, Bo Nix, 26 for 46, 279 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Something to keep in mind here was that he was the lead rusher with just 29 yards. We saw Jaleel McLaughlin, he goes for 21 yards. And then R.J. Harvey, he goes for 20 yards as well. But now with Jared Stidham coming in, usually the way you play things with a backup quarterback is a run-heavy game. But we didn't even see this run game get established with Bo Nix in the game. So see what happens with all of that. Biggest receiver here was Marvin Mims Jr. He goes for 93 yards and a touchdown. Lil Jordan Humphrey, he had a touchdown as well. So did Frank Crum, the offensive lineman. He finds himself in the end zone as well. So we will now see the Broncos move on to the next round, and we'll see what Sean Payton's able to do with Jared Stidham. The nightcap of that game on Saturday was the 49ers and the Seahawks, and this game, if you could even call it a game, was horrible. Seahawks win this one 41-6, and it just shows you that this Eagles team, if they played even half of what they're capable of playing, they would have beaten this Niners team. Now, they might have went and got their butts kicked in Chicago against the Bears, but that would have been a whole other story. The fact that the Seahawks put up 41 points and did not allow a touchdown says a lot about the Seahawks team. I've been on them all season long. Brock Purdy, 15 for 27, 140 yards with an interception. He was their lead rusher with 37 yards. Christian McCaffrey, the do-it-all man, could not do it here tonight. 35 yards rushing with 39 yards receiving. They lose this one, like I said, 41-6. Sam Darnold goes 12 for 17, 124 yards with a touchdown. Kenneth Walker III, 116 yards with 3 touchdowns. And then you had Jackson Smith and Jigba, 19 yards with a touchdown. And Rashid Shaheed, what a difference maker he has been since his addition at the trade deadline. He returned the opening kickoff for a touchdown to set the tone there in that game. Now on Sunday, you had the Texans and the Patriots in a very ugly, sloppy game. C.J. Stroud, though, 20 for 47, 217 yards with a touchdown and 4 interceptions. Now, that makes it 7 turnovers that C.J. Stroud had in this postseason. He had himself a tremendous rookie season. I'm all on board. I have a C.J. Stroud jersey. But since then, he has completely fallen off. He last year ranked himself as the 3rd best quarterback in football after having a horrible season. And there was just nothing going for this team. On defense, you had 5 sacks and 2 fumble recoveries. That's a lot to ask from your defense if your offense is going to put nothing up, and that's what we saw here. Jamarcus Ingram had an interception as well, so they forced 3 turnovers and had 5 sacks, and they still only put up 16 points on the day. Drake May, on the other hand, he went 16 for 27, 179 yards with 3 touchdowns. He did lose 2 fumbles. Like I said, the defense of the Texans was phenomenal. Their lead rusher was Ramondre Stevenson with 70 yards. Kayshon Boutte, he goes for a touchdown. Stephon Diggs with a touchdown. And Demario Douglas with a touchdown as well. So we will see the Patriots matching up with the Broncos. And actually what was a matchup a few years ago, or I guess more than a few, but we had I have a magazine in my room right now of Peyton Manning and Tom Brady going at it in the playoffs. I believe it was the AFC Championship between the two of them. So a little flashback to the past there with the two of them matching up. Then on the final game of this postseason weekend, we had the Rams take on the Bears in overtime, and the Rams win this one 20-17. And I mean, Caleb Williams played phenomenal in that last drive to get them down the field. He does a 360 spin around, finds his guy in the back of the end zone to take that game to overtime. Matthew Stafford, 20 for 42, 258 yards. Kyron Williams, he finds the end zone twice. You also had 2 interceptions by Kobe Durant, and Cam Curl had an interception as well. Caleb Williams, I'd like to say that he is the guy and that he made that amazing play, which of course he did, but he also cost him the game with that turnover late, that interception at the end of the game. He had 257 yards with 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. DeAndre Swift, 76 yards. DJ Moore finds the end zone, as well as Cole Kmet on that final drive there by Caleb Williams. But there's going to be some interesting matchups here. It's kind of reminiscent of when Nick Foles had to go in for the Eagles in 2017. It's kind of the same lineup of quarterbacks you're going to have here, as Jared Stidham's going to be the new Nick Foles in all of this. But I'm going to take the Patriots and the Seahawks to go on to move forward. Now, kind of some biases. These were the two teams I took to start the season, but, got to ride out with your picks. And I'm really excited to see what happens here. The Seahawks team just seems unstoppable. I definitely believe that whoever wins this NFC matchup between the Rams and the Seahawks is obviously going to go on to win the Super Bowl. They're just too high-powered. And you look at some of these teams here in the NFC, and just every matchup in the NFC seems like it's going to be a dogfight. Even that 49ers-Seahawks game, coming into it, you figured the Seahawks were going to win. Obviously not that big, but there just seems to be more intensity on the NFC side of things, while it seems more of a daycare and just la kind of play on the AFC side of things. So just something I noticed. I don't know if anybody else notices that kind of play there between the two conferences, but I do believe the NFC is more of a dogfight. It's more of a gritty conference than you would say it is in the AFC. And the final thing I want to mention here within the NFL, and I made a video about this earlier, so be sure to follow me at Let's Talk Sports. But the fact that some of these quarterbacks, like a Lamar Jackson, a Joe Burrow, a Josh Allen, I guess you could put Trevor Lawrence in there, but he's kind of on the other end of this debate. But they're kind of missing their windows. This was the perfect year. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes has dominated the AFC for many years now, past decade, I'd say. But with him not making the playoffs, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, they had a chance to make the playoffs and make a run. They did not make the playoffs. But Josh Allen, this was his prime opportunity to run the AFC. There was no team that they should have lost to in this playoff picture. They beat the Jaguars barely, and they then fell to the Broncos in overtime. But what will it take for any of these quarterbacks to get over that hump? Or are we seeing the emergence of this Bo Nix, this Drake May? I would say C.J. Stroud, but he's kind of not really leading this team all too well. And you see it with Trevor Lawrence as well. These teams that are kind of emerging as something. Meanwhile, you have teams that should have been something for so many years taking a step backward. Now all of their head coaches are fired, except the Bengals. But again, they can't get out of their own way, especially on that defense. I hope they bring in somebody like a Peter Woods to try and solidify that defensive line, or Parker Woods. But what are we going to see here with these quarterbacks going forward? Is the AFC turning over to these younger quarterbacks? Or are we going to start to see, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow start to turn it around, especially Josh Allen even, with a new head coach? Maybe it can be turned around and flipped on its head, but as of right now, it seems like we're starting to see the AFC completely flip. Meanwhile, you have the same quarterbacks fighting it out over there in the NFC, and it just continues to paint this contrast as to who is more dominant in the NFL, which conference has more power. I think the young talent would definitely go over to the AFC, but you look at what this NFC has been able to do and how much grit they bring to a football field. I think the NFC is here to stay for a while, but we'll see what happens with that. We're going to have some big matchups this weekend. We do have a lot of coaching carousel going on here. Some of the biggest things I'll keep you guys up to date with. We have New York Giants hiring John Harbaugh. I think he'll be a great fit there. Young talent on that team. I'm also hoping they bring in another wide receiver in Carnell Tate from Ohio State. You pair him up with Malik Neighbors, you have Cam Scattergo in the backfield, and then Jackson Dart. That offense is going to be good for years to come. And then you look at this defense, they have the pieces there as well. Somebody like Abdul Carter running that defensive line. This Giants team is really going to be able to compete for a while. That's kind of why I'm scared as an Eagles fan as to, are we missing our windows now? Because some of these younger teams are going to be there to compete. Cowboys, they're kind of like the Mets. The Cowboys are going to cowboy, the Mets are going to Met. On the Falcons side of things, Kevin Stefanski, he gets hired there. We'll see what he can do with that team. It's still a decent offense. I don't know what they're going to do with Penix. If he's their answer going forward, they might run with Kirk Cousins this season. I think he could be a good piece for that offense. Miami Dolphins, they hired Jeff Hafley. He was a defensive coordinator, so maybe they're looking to go more defensive. I'm not really sure what the answer is in Miami. I think they need to bring in a new quarterback and call it quits with Tua, and they're going to have to revamp that entire offense because Tyreek Hill, he seems like an interesting situation as well. The Tennessee Titans, they hire Robert Saleh, another really interesting coaching hire because the Tennessee Titans are kind of where the Jets were when they hired Robert Saleh, and he could not win a football game with them. Now, maybe there's more hope going with Cam Ward at quarterback. Maybe you're hoping that there's some young talent that can finally get established. Maybe you bring in somebody like a Jordan Tyson out of Arizona State in the draft. Maybe he could be a difference for you. But Robert Saleh, an interesting hire, in my opinion, for the Tennessee Titans. There's still coaches interviewing right now. For the Cardinals, they're interviewing Thomas Brown, Matt Burke. They wanted John Harbaugh, but that obviously did not work out. The Ravens, they're going to be without a head coach as John Harbaugh did get hired. They're going to be interviewing Joe Brady, the Bills' offensive coordinator. Maybe he's their answer there. The Cleveland Browns still have the spot to fill. The Vegas Raiders still have a spot to fill. Steelers still have a spot to fill. And the Eagles still have a spot to fill at their offensive coordinator. So there are still lots of jobs out there. I'm going to be really curious to see who takes some of these because when everybody gets fired, it kind of seems like you just shake up the coaches that already were where they were. You're not really bringing up new talent. It's kind of just a shuffle. You saw this with the college football coaching firings. They're kind of just shuffling where they're playing rather than anybody new kind of stepping into the picture. It's just hoping somebody might be a better fit on my team than they were somewhere else. So maybe that's the answer, but thank you guys for listening again. I'm here every Wednesday, 11 to 12 on 95.3 WCHE, talking the latest in sports. This was Locker Room Buzz. You can check me out for daily content at Let's Talk Sports on Instagram and TikTok, and check me out on my website as well. That's letstalksports.com. That's Let's TAWK Sports.com for daily podcasts. I will have a podcast dropping today at 1 o'clock, giving my final thoughts on this college football season and especially a recap there of the national championship. So be sure to check that out, like, subscribe, and comment. And I'll talk to you guys next week here, Locker Room Buzz.